computer. Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much. Minimal interoperability mechanisms, and particularly focusing on how they can be tools to help build data spaces. And this is part of a small set of webinars that we're doing as part of the ODALA project. And so before I go properly into the MIMS, let me just get the camera right. Before I go properly into the MIMS, I'll say a little bit about ODALA, because it's a very good example, really, of what we're talking about. So if you don't know, ODALA is a European project. It's launched September 2020, and it's pretty well finished. Its official finish was tomorrow, but there's some tidying up that's going to be done. It's a collaboration, as always, between European cities, companies, research institutes. And the focus of ODALA is to improve data management and sharing between cities and regions to facilitate decision-making public administrations. So it's been a really good project focusing on how we can actually make this thing work. The project itself has Kiel as the key city, and that developed and trialed some applications that supported the reuse of the IoT data on mobility and environment. So that was really as a kind of a way of testing out in a focused way how you can enable effective and useful data sharing between agencies that have different ways of managing and gathering data. That learning was then shared in 5 other cities or regions. And on the top of that learning that Kiel had gained, those cities worked on other areas of data sharing and reuse to kind of build some very practical experiences of how you can get collaboration around data sharing, building on a common approach to it that allows cities to then take that learning and apply it in different areas. It's as I say, there's the partners, a mix of cities, industry, and other agencies, research agencies like that. And focusing down very much on the subject of today, ODALA stands for Collaborative, Secure and Replicable Open Source Data Lakes for Smart Cities. And as you can see, when the project was first set up, the idea really was data lakes, but things move on. And so as the priorities have changed within Europe, the focus has turned much more to data spaces, and that's how it's really been addressed in Kiel and the other cities. So you know this, but the kind of more traditional way of handling local data ecosystems was a data lake where you try to bring data from many different sources into a central repository, where all the data can be effectively in one place, and then you can reuse it as needed. Whereas increasingly we're seeing that a much better way, or another way, let's say, of managing that is, rather than bringing everything into one single place, it's about setting up a data ecosystem where you agree the standards and the governance rules to enable data to continue to be managed by the organization that collected it, but where it's made available under specific rules and requirements for other agencies within that ecosystem to be able to use it to develop whatever applications or they need. So it's a really interesting idea. It's being developed. We've got OmegaX here. There's a number of other agencies that are, the mobility data space and so on. So it's being developed as we speak, because this is quite a challenge, because what you're trying to do is to enable an ecosystem to work where you've got many organizations, big and small, some with very sophisticated methodologies of dealing with data, and some with much simpler ones that maybe have very little resources to help do a detailed job, but still have a key role to play in how that whole data ecosystems work. And that's really what we're talking about today. The fact that in any city or community, you've got many different agencies that are working in many different systems within the city, and increasingly all of those systems not only interact with each other, but generate data and require good data to work well. And so within all of these different systems, you're getting ecosystems of agencies that help to manage transport and logistics, utilities use, sports, shopping, health, education, and so on. So all of these ecosystems are being set up, looking at how they can best make their data available to the benefit of the whole ecosystem, but in a way that's really managed so that you're managing personal data, confidential data effectively, while still enabling everyone to get good value and help to ensure that whole ecosystem works well. And of course, within a city, the city itself needs to be able to draw data in from all of those different other ecosystems to help understand how the city as a whole can best be managed. And that's what we're talking about here. Not only a data space for mobility, a data space for energy and all the rest of it, but we need a local data space to be able to benefit from all the useful data that will help give that overall understanding of what's going on in the city and help that to work well, not only for the benefit of the public administration, but also the business and the citizen can gain access to a much better understanding of what's happening in the city so that they can live their lives better within it. However, as all of us know, it's very complicated to set up a local data space. There are many issues that need to be addressed, each of which is complicated and needs lots of careful work. In each of these areas, there are many standards that have been developed by many different standards organizations, and it's very important that everything is managed in a thorough, effective way to enable that data space to work well. And it's no good just to tackle one or two of these. I mean, this is just a selection, but all of these different issues need to be taken on board as we build the different data spaces that we're involved in. Now, the great thing is that standards organizations at every level are busy working at this, developing standards that cover all the key issues in each of these different areas, mentioned many others, that will enable cities, communities, and city service providers to tackle these issues. You've got different standards committees, which are specialist committees focusing on different challenges. And of course, if all cities and city service providers within those cities would all follow the same set of detailed standards, then interoperability between them would be really easy, and it would be no problem whatsoever to set up a data space that worked really well. So that's great. However, there's a number of issues here. The first is that there are many different standards or development organizations in the world, international ones, national ones, sector-specific ones, professional focused ones, and each of these standards development organizations builds families of standards from different viewpoints, depending on what their center of expertise is and so on. And very often those families of standards overlap. They're not necessarily compatible with each other, and sometimes they actually conflict with each other. So it's a very complicated thing to navigate your way around the standards landscape. The other issue, of course, which is the key thing about data spaces, is that it's not that cities and communities are able to manage there's one agency that manages everything, but cities and communities work because of many autonomous or semi-autonomous agencies that manage a bit of the whole processes. Some of them are public, some of them are private, some of them potentially are even not for profit. But all of these different agencies that are needed to make each individual service work well and the city as a whole to work well for the benefit of the citizen, each of them have their own processes, their own ways of doing things, their own standards families that they follow. And it's not possible to ensure that all agencies in any city or community follow identical processes and standards. So that's the second. The third issue is, of course, that many cities and communities and many service providers within cities and communities have long-term contracts with technology companies that may require the use of proprietary solutions. And that's just the way things are. It makes sense for many organizations not to set up their own IT department with a comprehensive understanding of all the issues to manage everything themselves. Many outsource many of those things to integrators. And if you do that, the great thing is you don't have to worry about anything, and the integrators integrate everything and make things work well. But those integrators use their own proprietary solutions very often to do that. And it means that within your organization, everything should work well together, but it may well mean that they're not using solutions that easily link up with solutions that are provided and used by other organizations within the ecosystem. So that's the third challenge. And the fourth challenge is that even if you just decided to work with standards from standards organizations tend to be very complicated documents. Some of them 100 pages, 150 pages, 200 pages long, with huge numbers of requirements, many of which you need to be an expert yourself in that particular area to be able to understand and to comply with. And that can be extremely daunting for many organizations. They look at that and they say it's not just about standards in one area. We need standards for personal data management, for security, for AI, fair AI, for all kinds of things like that. And we just don't have the time or the expertise to be able to look at all of these different standards and see how we can implement them within our organizations. And so rather what we find, of course, is that many organizations are looking for good enough solutions that they can implement quickly within their existing capabilities. So really what we're talking about is when you're trying to set up a data space, you're having to deal with a very messy ecosystem, which is using many different levels of standards, types of standards, proprietary solutions. And the challenge is, how can you get all of these different organizations and their different processes and so on, how you can enable that data coming from these different places to be able to be shared and reused in a reliable and effective way. And that's what you guys that are looking at data space, developing data spaces, that's your challenge. So in summary, we can see that many cities and city stakeholders have limited resources and therefore need a method to put in place a good enough foundation for data sharing ecosystems. They don't have the resources to do something that's perfect, that covers every issue. Just good enough is good enough. And the second thing is that the challenge is that all the different stakeholders in a city will be using different methodologies to implement data sharing, data gathering, data reuse. And what we need to be able to do in any data space is to enable as good as possible interoperability between them. So this is particularly relevant where stakeholders within the city or community that may use different methodologies for handling data have to share data with each other. It's no point in saying you've all got to follow these complicated, well tried and tested standards that enable perfect interoperability if what you have is that many of the stakeholders within your ecosystem, data space ecosystem, that's beyond us. We can't do it. Sorry, we can't therefore join your data space. That won't work. We have to deal with things as they are. So please interrupt me if you want. I don't know, Marguerite, if you see anyone putting their hand up, if you could let me know. I'm very happy to stop.
I will let you know if needed.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Thank you so much. So this is the role of the MIMs. So the MIMs are minimal but sufficient interoperability mechanism. And the idea is that what we're trying to do is to not to deal with things as they should be, which standards bodies tend to do, but things as they are, taking account of the fact that organizations within local communities have varying amounts of resources and expertise around data sharing and various different priorities. And we have to take account not only of the different standards families, but the proprietary systems. How can we take account of that messy, complicated environment and still enable, still develop solutions that will enable data to be shared and reused within cities and between cities and communities around the world? And so the MIMs are effectively an intermediate approach to interoperability. What we try and do in the MIMs is to focus on the core requirements of standards and provide a simple but solid starting place for standards implementation. So we don't say you've got to do the whole thing all at once. What we try to do is to identify what are the key requirements that are needed to get you going, that mean that you've got a good foundation and you can then build on that step by step as and when you have the resources to do so. And the MIMs also address not only the core requirements of standards, but they address the variety of technical approaches followed by different sets of standards and proprietary solutions, and provide methodologies to help align these as far as practical, as good as possible. So that's what the MIMs are. They enable cities and communities and their stakeholders, the members of different data space ecosystems, to put in place mechanisms that provide as good as possible interoperability to get them started. Clearly, you need, at the end of the day, you need full integration to take place. But what we're saying is if we can get a foundation of as good as possible interoperability between the different agencies in an ecosystem, it makes it easier then to start to align and integrate data from those different agencies so that you can then get the value from it. So that's the aim. And as I said, we're not reinventing the wheel. We're not inventing new but simpler standards. We're basing what we do on what already exists, what good practice is out there. So the minimal interoperability mechanisms, the aim is, this is the aspiration, this is what we try to achieve, good enough interoperability to allow integration of systems and the development of a viable market, minimal so that there's no unnecessary complexity or time to implement, and with minimal resources required to enable organizations themselves to get started quickly, but within a data space to enable a good enough system to be there to enable the different agencies to be able to share and reuse data with each other. And then clearly enough defined so that it's easy to determine if a product or a service or an agency is complying with that mechanism, and clear enough to know if we're not, what we need to do to put that in place. And that's a kind of an outline of the benefits of what we're trying to do. It's hopefully a win-win, that something will be of value to everybody. So I know I'm rattling on. Please feel free to ask any questions. Quick history and background. The first 3 MIMs came out of the Synchronicity project, which aimed to develop IoT-based services that could be easily implemented in other cities. Really effective. It was, as cities were starting to see the value in how the data that you could gather from IoT could help them manage air quality, parking, all sorts of other issues in their cities. And they wanted to do that in a way that will enable enough consistency that would, between different cities, that will enable services developed in one city to be easily ported to another city. And so this was designed by cities that were just beginning to use IoT, which is a good start. It's like, what do we really need? We don't want anything unnecessary. What do we really need to make this work? It was very pragmatic. And so we had those first three, and those first three are being used quite widely throughout Europe and elsewhere. And now, as you know, based on the value that cities were gathering from those first three MIMs, other MIMs have been suggested, and we're now working on them at various levels of development. We've got a list of 10 there, as I say, at various levels of development. Some we're well on the way to completing, some we've just started work on, and some are kind of there to be started on in the near future, once we've got the capacity to be able to do it. And of course, that's just a list of 10 that people have recognized already are needed, but we're sure that there will be more MIMs needed in the future, particularly when we look at, you know, as the data space environment becomes more sophisticated and more experience is gathered on what's needed, as we work on local digital twins and understand the need not only to share data, but to share, to be able to align our models, the results of our digital twin of one aspect of the city with other aspects of the city, digital twins of other aspects of the city, so that we can start to make links across. And of course, when it comes to the cityverse, for instance. And so we know that we've got 10, but we know that this is a journey that's going to continue as we work with cities and communities and stakeholders to identify what's needed and how we can develop them. So, and just a quick sort of clarification in case you're not aware of it, that the MIMs themselves are something that open and agile smart cities have been effectively managing, and they're aimed at providing consistent global processes to enable a global market. And, you know, we thankfully in open and agile smart cities, you know, we've got membership in Japan, Korea, other countries around the world. And the key thing there is to make sure that whatever the MIMs, whatever they contain is something that can be implemented wherever you are in the world. However, we've also got the MIMS Plus, and the MIMS Plus are what's quoted in often European policy documents, in often increasingly being required or alluded to in procurements or new projects that are being funded by the Commission. And the MIMS Plus take the MIMs, they're not any different to the MIMs, they're absolutely, they take each MIM and they wrap that MIM, if you like, in the EU policy and directives clothing to make sure that any additional requirements that are needed to ensure that it can be compatible with what's happening in the EU and with the overall policy drivers within the EU, that by adding those requirements and that guidance, that can help ensure that the MIMs work really effectively to deliver on those bigger issues. So they're the same in their essence. It's just that the MIMS Plus have that European policy and regulatory kind of clothing around them. So I see something in the chat. Okay, yes. So don't worry. The PowerPoint is going to be provided to all participants, and hopefully this recording will also be made available for watching later. This is very much, you know, I am quite realistic. I do not expect all of you to remember everything I say. And also, clearly what we want is you to have a chance to digest it, so that not only now in this webinar, but later on as well, that we can get your comments, questions to help make sure that we're able to explain these things effectively. Good. So where we are today, let me just get this going again. So for a while, Open and Agile Smart Cities was trying to manage it on very little resources. And so things were happening fairly slowly. But now, over the last 12 months and on into the future, as has also been alluded to here, the European Commission have funded a number of initiatives that include tasks related to the development of the MIMS. So that means that many organizations have clear outputs that are related to the MIMS. They can put resources of time and effort into working on the MIMS, which is brilliant because it means that we can progress much faster over the coming year or two with developing the MIMS. But of course, the challenge in all of that is coordinating all of this energy and all of this focus to make sure that as the MIMS are developed in detail, that they're done in a way that's consistent with each other and continues to provide the value that we want and we need. And so what we've been doing over the last 6 months or so has been reviewing where we are with the MIMS. We've had a lot of experience of using the MIMS now, and that's been helpful so that we can get a sense of how well they work as they are, and where there might be improvements that would make them even more useful. The other thing is that when we worked on the newer MIMS, which were really tackling somewhat different types of issue within data sharing, we came to see that it was difficult to have a consistent format that in a way that linked with the first 3 MIMS because of the differences in the topic that was being focused on in the newer ones. And what was needed was to find a way of allowing all of the new MIMS to be developed using a common format and structure that will make it much easier for them to be seen as a package together. And then the third thing was that as data spaces, local digital twins, Cityverse, these new very important topics are coming across the landscape. Cities, communities, organizations are seeing how they need to be putting these things into place. And so we want to make sure that the MIMS are able to adjust to this new environment and to be able to provide the same sort of support for data spaces and so on that they were supporting for previous ways that cities were setting up their data ecosystems. And so therefore, it became clear that we needed a new well-defined process for developing and structuring the MIMS, particularly because, of course, a lot of the work now is being done by people who are in different projects that may not be so familiar with the history and need to have a clear guidance as to what the MIMS are all about. So that's why we've had the opportunity, we've grabbed hold of this opportunity to work with ITU Study Group 20, International Telecommunications Union Study Group 20, to standardize the MIMS format. Now, ITU Study Group 20, ITU is a UN agency, effectively. Its members are national governments, universities, large telecommunications-related companies, and it has traditionally been the organization that's developed standards around telecommunications around the world to ensure that it works everywhere. that we can share information through wired and wireless networks that will enable us to keep good communication going globally. And so that's their expertise. And obviously IoT is very much based on that because it's about being able to share data between devices and not just people. And they've got a number of there's a number of working groups in their Study Group 20 that are looking at different aspects of IoT, and particularly about how IoT can support, and data related to IoT can support smart cities and communities. And so we've been working within Study Group 20 on developing this new recommendation called y.mim. And the focus of that recommendation is that to define minimal interoperability mechanisms as a method of specifying sets of requirements that will enable minimal but sufficient interoperability for smart and sustainable cities and communities. It's important to be clear that we're not standardizing the existing MIMs. We're not standardizing MIM1 and MIM2 and MIM3 at the moment. What we're doing is standing back and trying to find a way of describing clearly what a MIM is, and providing a process to tackle any key issue around interoperability related to data use and reuse that will enable enable the support of many agencies in this complicated, messy world to start to make use of these new opportunities that we have to use data well. So what we're trying to do is absolutely to be much better at having a clear and consistent process for developing the tools that cities and communities and their stakeholders need. So we work with the ITU because as an international standardization organization, it gives us a chance to take the MIMs to people who know a lot about data interoperability, data management and sharing, who don't know the MIMs because they come from Korea, Japan, the US, other places, and they can come and look at those MIMs with a fresh eye and ask questions which to us seem obvious, but for them, because they're not used to the MIMs, are not so obvious, to help us make sure that we are really thinking clearly about every detail of what we're proposing. And that means that by doing this, we can be sure that the concept and structure of the MIMs will be described in a clear and unambiguous way, so they can be properly positioned within the world of standards, and also that they can be well understood by those who want to use them, whether it's an organization within a city or whether it's an industry body, a company that's wanting to develop products and services that can be used within a data space. So when we were, we're trying to think about what the MIMs are, we here have a proposed new description. It's not finalized yet. We're very far on the way towards the final agreement, but this is still not the absolute necessarily the final way we're talking about it. But at the moment, we are saying that a MIM is a description of a common set of requirements that will provide a minimal but sufficient set of capabilities that the city needs to achieve a certain objective, along with a description of the mechanisms by which one or more different technical solutions address those requirements. It also provides guidance to help gain a useful level of interoperability between the different mechanisms that may be used to achieve that set of capabilities. Now, that's been described in terms of the needs of a city, but actually, I think it's equally applicable to any service providing organization within a city or within that is providing services to a community, whether it's a rural area, whether it's a region, whatever it is. This is relevant to all of that range of organizations together. And so when we think about the MIM, the new kind of format for the MIM, we have this clear structure of how each MIM is developed. Each layer is being built on the layer before it. Let me just check the chat. Classical industrial engineering practice, the V model. I'm not going to address that. That's a good question. I'll think about that later. But thanks, Sarah. So, the new format for the MIM is that you start with a clear objective or set of objectives. And that sets a scope for the MIMS. So it's drafted in a way that will show clearly what that MIM aims to help a city or community or city stakeholder to achieve. Then that objective is broken down into a number of capabilities which describe a minimal but sufficient set of business requirements that will deliver the objectives to a good enough level and in a way which is within the resource of most cities. So what that tries to do is to take a simple objective, if you like, it's what they talk about as the elevator pitch, 25 words that you describe what you're aiming to achieve. That's the objective. And the capabilities unpick that a little bit to make it clear what are all the different things that are needed to ensure that that objective can be met. And both of those two things really are addressed to city or organizational objectives, to the business drivers, to look at how this MIM will enable the city or the organization to be able to deliver something better. What you then do is you turn that around and see how you can describe each of that minimal but sufficient set of capabilities in a way that looks at what are the function and the quality requirements that are needed to deliver it. So this is, in a way, if you were going to procure a solution to deliver the capabilities you needed, how you would need to describe those capabilities in a procurement document so that it would be very clear to those who wanted to address the capabilities that you wanted to achieve, that they would know exactly how to address it in a way that would enable you to see, yes, tick, tick, tick. This proposal addresses each of the functional and quality requirements that we know we need, and so therefore this will work. So that's what the requirements do, and the requirements are the core of what a MIM is. This is how you test whether something is MIMS compliant. This is how you test whether or not the city has achieved that MIM. So that's fine, but what we recognize that to achieve that requirement, you need a solution, a technical solution of some kind, and there are often several different solutions that might be equally effective, or at least have different strengths and weaknesses, but can all address that set of requirements. And so in the mechanism section of a MIM, what we do is to identify, and this may be that, we start with one or two and it may be a growing list, but to identify what are different technical solutions that each address the set of requirements. And having done that, and what we're trying to do there is to capture in a MIM solutions that are not theoretical solutions, but technical solutions that already are being used by city stakeholders to achieve those sorts of requirements. So they're already out there, they're tried and tested. Within a city, there will be some organizations that may be using that mechanism. And so by describing it, we're then in the final stage, if you like, able to develop some interoperability guidance to say, well, if within your city, this organization is using this mechanism and this organization is using that mechanism, here's a way that you can come up with achieving a good enough interoperability between those different technical approaches to delivering the requirements you need. So that's the structure of the MIMS. It's worth just unpicking that a bit as well to say that there are two minimals in what we're talking about. There's a minimal but sufficient set of capabilities. In other words, we're not trying to address every possible capability that might be relevant to achieving an objective, but what we're trying to do is to identify what are the core set of capabilities that would enable the most important aspects of that objective to be achieved, and then what are the functional and quality requirements that will achieve those capabilities, so that by fulfilling that minimal but sufficient set of capabilities, you've got a good enough basis, a start to achieving a city objective or a city stakeholder objective. So that's one way that we're using minimal. And then the second way is a minimal but useful level of interoperability between two different technical mechanisms that are for alternative ways to provide that city with the capabilities. So all that in organization. So what we're saying there is we need to agree a minimal but sufficient set of capabilities within a data space and the functional quality requirements that are needed for those to deliver those capabilities. And then having done that, recognizing that there may be alternative ways of delivering that common core set of capabilities, how can we start to align between organizations that may be using somewhat different approaches to achieve that basic set of capabilities? So let's look at that, to unpick it a little bit. So what we're saying is that to achieve an objective completely might demand many different capabilities that would take a lot of time and resource to do it. If we can identify what are the core capabilities, that makes it easy for cities to say, okay, or organizations, yes, that makes sense. We can achieve that, and we can put that in place. And then they can continue to add capabilities as and when they prove appropriate. But the key point of that is not just that it helps organizations to get started around data sharing in the different aspects we're talking about here, but by encouraging many organizations to implement mechanisms that address the same minimal set of capabilities, that simplifies the work. This is a really good foundation for interoperability. So let's think as an example, MIM6 data security. It's something we haven't progressed with very much, but MIM6 is about, as an objective, that communities and the organizations that serve them can implement affordable and effective cybersecurity measures, especially relating to the data coming from IoT devices and the data being shared between organizations in a data space. Sounds very simple, but anyone who knows anything about cybersecurity, and I'm sure all of you know that actually there's a whole list of different issues that you need to address to make your organization really cyber secure. It's not just the security of data itself, but there's the security of the physical infrastructure to make sure that it can't be hacked. And particularly that's true when you've got IoT devices out in the wild that could easily, which are sending information back wirelessly. So that's one issue. You've also got all of kind of the phishing and the social the ways that people who are wanting to hack into your data are able to fall or in some other way get your staff to share. You could think of many different capabilities that are needed, and the question is, what are the core set? Because the problem is, supposing we identified 20 important capabilities to achieve that objective, what you'd find is different organizations would, in trying to achieve a good cybersecurity foundation in their organization, would be addressing different ones. Some might be more focusing on the social, some on the physical infrastructure, some on the IT, some on the data format, all sorts of different approaches. And so you'd have the different organizations in your data space focusing on different capabilities and implementing those. And that makes it really difficult to see if you can come up with a common, if you like, agreed set of cybersecurity mechanisms that would help your data space as a whole to be more secure. So that's the challenge. But if you could agree, let's start with 4 that all of us, all the organizations in that data space will address. You may address it in different ways, but let's say each of the organizations in your data space agree to at least address that same 4 sets of capabilities. They may address many others as well, but if all of them at least are addressing that same 4 capabilities, it will make it much easier to work out how you could use that to bring consistency between the security protocols and processes that are being used across the data space. So that's the first thing, identifying that minimal core set of essential capabilities that everybody can agree to work on together. Then the second point is minimal interoperability, the second minimal. What we're talking about there is that interoperability isn't an all or nothing situation. We all like plug and play, where everything just fits. You just have two different systems and boom, they work together perfectly. But the point is that between that and where there's no standard that is being followed, and you have to have customized integration between those two systems, which takes a huge amount of work. Between those two, there are many ways that you can help to get a certain level of interoperability that will make integration between the two different systems easier. And that's what we're trying to identify with minimal interoperability. So one example is pivotal points of interoperability, where what you're trying to identify is between two different approaches to achieving a common requirement or capability. Those two requirements, those two mechanisms might look quite different, but what are the common components that they both have? And there will be common components. And if you can identify those common components, that will make it much easier to say, okay, here's where we can start in bringing alignment between those different systems. And I'll talk, we'll give a few different examples in a moment about that. So one thing is identifying common components between different approaches to tackling a common objective. And then the other thing is, if you've got technical solution that's addressing a particular requirement or capability, that solution will need to link to different systems, the different other parts of the system within that organization. And those interfaces provide another option for developing interoperability, because if you can identify where are those common interfaces that they all link, where they're all linking to the other parts of the system, then you could identify APIs, things like that, that will enable different mechanisms to still be able to fit in properly within the overall system. So those are just two very quickly being addressed. Given that time is, we've almost come to the end, I just quickly, there's a couple of examples. We're at the moment in the process of updating the existing set of MIMs. The old format is still completely if you know, authorized and everything else. But what we're trying to do is to offer an alternative for some of the initial MIMs, and where what we're trying to do is to use this new format to describe what that MIM is in a way that will help that to be more effective in addressing, we hope, more effective in addressing the situation. But we're not there yet with any of them. We're still just beginning. So I just want to give a couple of examples. MIM 2, which is about data models. Now, we've tried to construct a clear objective for MIM 2. And the objective is to support the use of consistent and machine-readable definitions of all the entities about which data is being captured in a local data ecosystem, so that if you're talking about, for instance, traffic lights, or if you're talking about lampposts, or if you're talking about cars or buses, that all the data sets use precisely the same definition, machine-readable definition of that thing, so that when you find that thing mentioned in one data set, you could be sure that that's the same as when it's mentioned in another data set. And that's what is required so that you can combine data about these different entities in the confidence that all of these different data sets are referring to exactly that same thing. But it's also important as part of that to have a consistent way of describing each instance of that entity. In other words, which lamppost are we talking about? To make sure that when the different data sets, it's not enough that they have the same definition for a lamppost, but they also need to have the same definition for each single lamppost in the city, so that you can be sure that every data set that refers to that lamppost is referring precisely to that same lamppost. So that's the objective. We've identified 3 capabilities as core capabilities that will help to achieve that. Capability 1 is that all entities included in data sets are described using consistent data models to enable interoperability for applications and systems. The second capability is the data models used in data ecosystems are machine readable and can be handled by the contact management APIs. And the third one is all data sets in the data ecosystem use consistent identifiers for individual instances of each entity. So those are 3 capabilities. What we've tried to do is to take account of how things actually are. So we have capability 1. We've got one absolute fundamental requirement, which is that all data models used for all entities in any data set should be made explicit. So when you're taking data in any data space, that all the entities that are described, the data models used for that entity within that data set should be made explicit. And then there are 3 different options on top of that. Requirement 2A is that data models should, as far as possible, be taken from a commonly recognized set of standardized data models. And I've got, there's a list which is actually taken from the existing description of MIM2. But it means that all the data models should be taken from one or other of a common set of data models, so that because they're common and standardized sets, it's easy to set up translation engines, so that even if you're using different sets, if organizations are using different sets, it's easy enough to translate between them and make sure that you can align the data models. If you can't do that, because maybe there aren't any data model from any of those sets that's precisely what you need, you should at least use standardized concepts and vocabularies so that you can use an ontology service to enable a good enough level of consistency. And if you need to make a new data model, then it should be clearly defined using a consistent and explicit process. And we've got the smartdatamodels.org as a good example for how that can be done. I won't go anything more because time has come to an end, but this is just to give you a sense of how we go from an objective to a capability to a requirement. We've got a number of different mechanisms that we've described in this first draft of MIM2, and we've got a suggestion, for instance, about interoperability mechanisms, where we say it's basically saying that some mechanisms, when they're wanting to describe particular examples of an entity, would use a URI to say this is that particular lamppost and this is that other lamppost. So they use URIs, which are standardized by World Wide Web Consortium. Another way of standardizing identifiers is the digital object identifiers that ISO has standardized. The key thing is they're different, but there's a well understood way that you can transform a DOI into a URI. And so what we're trying to do there is to say, if you've got these 2 different mechanisms for addressing how you describe particular examples of an entity, here's a way that you can get interoperability between them. So I won't go too much about that, but MIM4 is about personal data management. And what we've done there somewhat differently is to say that to achieve personal data management for a citizen, you need personal data intermediaries to meet certain requirements, and you need the holders, the people who gather the data sets or who use the data to fulfill certain other requirements. And so we've got a set of capabilities, 4 capabilities for the citizen, and then requirements for data holders and data using services, and an equivalent set of requirements for personal data intermediaries. And that's what we're looking at using. And then there's a mechanism that's being developed, a tried and tested mechanism for interoperability between different approaches. So that's the end. I'm sorry it's been a bit of a rush. Please get in touch to find out more. We'll be starting the working group up again from September, October time. So if you're interested in any of these, either ones that are already working or maybe ones that you'd like to help us get started, please, if you want to talk, consider joining them, because this is a great way to work with your colleagues to develop these really useful tools that could be used right across not only Europe, but right across the world. And if you think there are key challenges related to your data space and so on that you've already identified that aren't covered by an existing MIMS, contact us. We might think, great, this is a great thing to work on. Or potentially you might think about doing the work yourself, because now we've got a clear process and methodology in place. It will make it much easier for various organizations to work on MIMS that, because of their consistent structure, will hopefully work well together. Thank you. Apologies for running slightly over time.
Thank you so much, Michael. I don't know if there are any questions from the attendees. You explained it so well, Michael, that no one has questions.
Well, I know time's finished. Please, I'm sure some of you do, and if you don't have them at the moment, something will come to you in the middle of the night when you think, please get back to me. I'd love to learn from you, from your perspective. We need to make these MIMS really clear, and we need to make sure that they are really useful for data space development across Europe and across the world. Andreas,
Yes,
I see you got your hand raised. Yeah.
Yeah, I have a good. Thanks for your impressive. Yeah, really, presentation. It's a great work. You started in 2020. You mentioned, and of course, a lot. Many things have happened in between. How do you think? What do you imagine? How your concept may be compatible to what's now done in Europe. Let's say the keyword, the standards collected by the DSSC, for example, and the concepts, the Data Space Support Center.
So I mean, the first thing to say, I mean, the MIMS have been around since, I guess, that they were beginning 2015 and so on. So
even longer.
So some of the MIMS have been out there being used, but clearly they need to be updated, and this is part of the work we're doing here. Obviously, if you look and see, the Database Support Center, obviously we are working with Database for Smart Sustainable Cities and Communities. We'll take the MIMS into consideration. What we're wanting to do is this is really a process of updating and clarifying, so that they can be a really good foundation for data spaces of all types to be able to use. So this is the process. I mean, what we've done is taken the learning from the MIMS that have been out there for some time, reflected on them. We're working at trying to make it clearer and to come up with a consistent way of doing it. We've got we've put out there, and I've just referred to them, some, if you like, first drafts of MIMS, and this is where we need your feedback and your help, so that we can take what we put out there and improve it, so that we can come up with much clearer and better versions of each of the MIMS that will really fit in with what data spaces need. So your help, Andreas.
Okay, okay.
Yeah, great.
We do our best, yeah, promise.
Fantastic. Let's keep in touch and let's see how we can make this, you know, really good for what you're doing. Thank you. Any other question? In which case, shall we say thank you very much indeed. Please get back to me. Let's keep the dialogue going. And it's been a pleasure to spend this hour or so with you all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone. We will be sending also information about this if you need, and Michael's contact as well if you don't have it. So thank you so much, Michael, and thank you for the attendees as well. Have a great week.
Take care, everybody.